Welcome everybody to our deadline live Q&A stream ahead of qualifying for the Bahrain Grand Prix. And guys, for the first time this season, we're doing the live stream at a normal time. I feel so good.
Yes, it's nice to be in the shed. Nice to be back in familiar surroundings, rather than the kitchen with too much coffee on the go.
I hear Terry's in the shed with a hornet this week, so maybe there's some extra content in store for us in this next hour.
There well could be, for those who are familiar with the podcast, the hornet which attacked me the other week is back. I think he's hiding in Lego City, so if I disappear, you'll see why, because I'm running for my life.
So Terry's up a few points on us in our league, and I have operatives all over the world. And so one of them might be visiting Terry in the next hour too. All right, gentlemen. So we've had 3 free practice sessions so far. Let's jump into some of that free practice data because we haven't had a lot of really representative sessions to see if the field has moved around at all. FP1, there were 6 rookies replacing a lot of the top drivers on the grid, so we don't really know what happened there. FP2, a fair bit of McLaren dominance, and that carried over into FP3. Does anything stand out from you, Terry, on the FP3 session that could impact our fantasy lineups this week?
Just how fast is that McLaren? I mean, come on, that's on a different world. I don't expect the gap will be that big between, obviously, Oscar and Lando going into qualifying, but that McLaren just looks on a different planet around this track. And interesting is one of the tracks they're saying they thought they would struggle on, which is pretty ominous sign for the rest of the grid if that's true. I don't know how much of it is just speculation and talk, but yeah, I mean, McLaren seem to be without a shadow of a doubt, and I think people are going to struggle to get close from this weekend looking at this.
Absolutely. They seem like they're just head and shoulders above everybody through the first 3 practice sessions. And all of the sims, all of the betting lines, we're going to go through those one at a time coming up after this, but it's so heavily favoring McLaren. Let me ask you this. In FP3, the wind started playing a bit of a factor, throwing people off on some of their faster laps. Do you think that could maybe throw a spanner in the works for qualifying where maybe someone qualifies out of position?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think is it turn 11 they seem to be struggling with? From right off the top of my head, seems to be a big factor. You only need to go slightly wrong, and track limits is going to be a big factor here, so that could wreck a lap somewhere. I'll imagine you want to get a banker lap in and try and go for it, but ultimately, I think the change in weather can always play a part. It's going to be a lot cooler, but still hotter than what it was pre-season testing and stuff. So, yeah, I think if you haven't got that banker lap in and you're winning the last run and something goes wrong, then potentially it's an issue which you could face, definitely.
I've been leaving Zach out of the chat because he's been frantically setting his lineup and posting, getting ready for his post. Zach, how you doing this morning?
Yeah, I'm doing good. Thank you very much. Yeah, I was just getting that tweet just ready. And honestly, for me, the only thing from practice 3 I'm interested to see is where really are Ferrari? Now, they're not going to be in my F1 fantasy team, but it could dispute some of those Mercedes sorts of builds we're looking at. Because realistically, I kind of want Mercedes to do well these days. So can Leclerc put it in between them? We'll see in qualifying.
We've got some friends in the chat this morning. Hey, Brian, we got BZ in the chat. I've got your team, so we're going to talk about those in just a little bit. Hi, Claudia. Oh, Stickman's in the chat. Hey, Stickman. All right. LFG to you too, John. I'm fired up now that we're not in the middle of the night Eastern time. David's coming to us from Mexico. Hey, David.
Oh, nice.
And of course,
Mike's David, you're too good fan.
Oh, good question, David. Yeah, we want to know: are you a Checo fan? You want to see him back next year with Cadillac?
Yeah, definitely.
It's a great question. Now, just going back to wrap up the FP3 times here, the only thing that's notable is that Hülkenberg had a pretty big issue about halfway through the session. Looks like he went into anti-stall. That ended his session pretty early. I imagine Sauber's going to revive the car in time for qualifying, but it could be the first ominous sign, if you're keeping Hülkenberg on your team, that perhaps there is a potential DNF in your future there.
Yeah, I think they'd be fine. It's more a case of getting the car back and resetting it and seeing what's wrong with it. I don't think it's a major issue, probably more of a software thing, but it's like anything, you got to get it back to the pits. And when that red flag and that timer keeps going, a lot of the time they can't actually get it back there. So Michael's got a lovely pun there right on cue that Hulk is anti-stalled out of his team no matter what.
That's very fair. Yes, especially
Brilliant.
now that his
Yeah.
Australia score has fallen off of his 3-race average. He's going to need a huge week to not have a big loss. So I think everybody is off the Hulk train. I said
Yeah,
Stroll. I'm off
definitely.
the Stroll train too.
Yeah, Stroll's getting off as well.
Good, good.
And then seeing one of the polls already going up, 55 votes. I've asked, will you have Bortoletto in your F1 Fantasy team? Obviously, a very cheap and risk-free asset, but still, 81% will not have him in his team.
Ooh.
I do understand that, but yeah.
So it's a good time to show our tier list from this week. I've got to reorient myself with this slide because the number one liked comment on our YouTube this week was that the fence was running up and down. So it was not, in fact, a fence. It was maybe a ladder or some railroad tracks. So our producer, Greg, has moved the fence back to a left-right orientation. And now we've just got to figure out where everybody is on the slide. Bortoletto's over here on the fence because he's at that price floor of 4.5 million. He can't go any lower. He's also in a Sauber, so how many points is he going to get you? So I can see why a lot of you might not have him on your team. But as we talk about some of our top lineups, if you can't afford them, moving from a Haas driver or Hulkenberg or Stroll into Bortoletto might free up those funds to get you there.
Yeah, definitely.
Terry, this is around the time where you and I start pumping, liking, and subscribing if you haven't already. We love to see a lot of likes before we start going into the lineups. That way we can get more people into the chat and make this bigger and bigger as the weeks go on.
Yeah, I was just keeping an eye on that Hornet.
Keeping an eye on the Hornet. He's on my list.
He's close. He's close.
I've got an interesting question straight away from the chat as well. Ahmed asks, why is Max a sell? So I think in my opinion, it is purely just because it's not of how much points he could get. I mean, I haven't seen much from Red Bull so far this weekend, but it's more because Verstappen needs 38 points to increase the max 0.3. And when you've got the likes of both Mercedes and Piastri, who don't need that much, they're just much safer options.
Yeah.
It's a very popular question this week. How do you have a driver that had such an impressive win in Japan last week? He's won 2 in a row in Bahrain. Why is he a sell this week? I just haven't seen enough from Red Bull this week. I think in terms of the free practice times, he's been a little bit lower. I'll show you the sims and betting lines in just a moment to show Verstappen a fair bit off of the McLaren drivers. And then also just some of his quotes in the car. Usually he's very grumpy on Friday. Red Bull fixes everything on Saturday and they look quite fast, but he looked pretty out of sorts in FP3 too. So I'm starting to wonder if Japan was truly a magical Max moment and now the realities of that Red Bull car are coming back to haunt them in Bahrain.
Yeah, I don't think Red Bull is showing enough to make me put them above the McLarens at all. So I think that's why he's in that sell thing. It's a lot of money for a driver, which potentially on paper is going to be maybe on a podium because it's Max. Let's be honest. But I think in terms of what you can free up by not having Max in your team, it puts him in that sell category for that reason. To be honest.
To put him into perspective as well, when Max won in Japan, he only scored, well, I say only, he scored 36 points. And if he scored that this weekend as well, it still wouldn't get him in that maximum budget increase, which is how much points he needs.
Oh, wow. So that really is a deal breaker then.
Yeah, absolutely.
Good morning, Melissa. Welcome aboard.
Morning.
Zach, Tommy says that you are the GOAT and that we are blessed to have you here.
It's always too kind. He's too kind.
Tommy, Zach will send you the money later. Dropping by.
All right. Let's go over to betting lines because I think the coolest thing that we've seen over these practice sessions, and this literally just refreshed as we went live, Lando had been up on Piastri heading into the weekend and for every session. And it was only after FP3 that the lines inverted. And now Piastri is the most likely winner of the race, according to sportsbooks. This is important because you have teams like Zach and I who were on Lando previously trying to afford the McLaren Mercedes constructor pairing. And we're going to have to make that move to Piastri and eat the -10. But perhaps he could get that race win, either fastest lap or driver of the day, and make that point gap up for us.
Yeah.
And good luck at the bottom of the top 10. We've got our boy Hajar, who I think will go up in price, rounding out the top 10. So good news for me.
Brian's asked an interesting question. What's an acceptable amount of the cost cap to leave on the table to budget build? I mean, I left millions on there last week to budget build, to be honest, Brian. So if that's what you're aiming for, don't be afraid to leave quite a bit on the table, I would say. But I would say just double check it, because this week it feels like you can do a balance between the two. To be honest, feels like you can still do a healthy budget build with some healthy points as well. So just be careful what you've got in there. You might find a better way on. Yeah, say Michael left 7. I think I left 8. Wasn't it, Adam? Last week it was a lot on the table.
Yeah, basically it's that gap between Piastri and Lando, that 6.5 to 8 million range. I would say if you go more than 10 million on the table, that means you probably have either a constructor upgrade or a midfield driver upgrade somewhere on the table that you're still leaving there. And then it goes to the question of, do I use that money and take a -10, or if you're on a -10, go to a -20? So I think that's going to be a team by team sort of scenario.
I was speaking a little bit about this beforehand as well, before the live stream. And next weekend, if no one really has a star performance in the B tier drivers, I don't think it doesn't matter how much budget you leave around your team, because next weekend, potentially, there's not a lot of chance for anyone really to go up, because then we get rid of those China scores, and then all of a sudden everyone's going to struggle to go up. So I don't think how much budget you leave on the table should matter too much for Bahrain, either too much or too little.
Yeah.
Well said. And then let's also go over, I don't know if the team calculator's refreshed for post FP3. Not quite yet. I don't think it'll move very much. So maybe we can just move into the budget builder for now, just to show the kinds of points and the odds of these drivers going up. You can see another big difference here between Piastri and Norris, the likelihood of them going up the maximum of 0.3 million. Piastri in a much better place based on the number of points he needs. And then in the B tier, it's basically a murderer's row of guys that I want in my lineup this week. Hadjar, Behrman, Doohan, Ocon. So it looks like there are some clear-cut options for these budget building teams this week.
Yeah, it just really is going to be interesting to see if any of them can survive, because just looking at that budget straight away, Ocon, 24 points is going to go off the cards. Behrman, 20 points. Stroll, 17 points. All of a sudden, they are going to need, potentially, if they only get around 5 points, 20 plus points next weekend to go up. And it's going to be the same for everyone, I think. Yeah.
Surfnight tells us in the chat there will be no FP3 sim. I imagine that's because the data is so similar, or it's not a representative session, that we've got all we're going to have. So,
yeah, I don't think lots going to change, is it? Like we said, in terms of what we saw.
And so as we go through some of these sims, you've got Piastri ahead of Norris, like we're seeing everywhere else, with Russell and Verstappen rounding out the podium places there. Ferrari just a little bit lower. It looks like for those of us considering Mercedes this week, that Antonelli will do enough to make a McLaren Mercedes build work for us. And then when we head all the way down, the Saubers are right at the very bottom of things. Aston Martin seem to be falling back. And then Haas and Vicar. All right.
Heading back to when we were talking about Verstappen as well, the latest poll, will Max Verstappen be in your F1 fantasy team? 93% of people agreed that he's not a viable asset, compared to 7 who said yes. So that really does speak volumes.
You know,
it's got up to 94.
I was trying something last night. It's if I wanted to have McLaren and Red Bull instead of McLaren and Mercedes, what would I need to do that? And I made all the moves I could, and I was 0.1 million short. If I had Piastri, the 4 cheapest drivers, and McLaren, I was 0.1 million off of McLaren Red Bull. Which is interesting. And there were some other folks talking about once you get over 106.5 million entering this week, which a few teams are, you could actually run triple McLaren and Haas with the cheapest drivers, which could be really incredible for those of you that are really leading the way on the cost cap growth.
Yeah, definitely. How are we doing those likes, Adam? What are we doing with likes, Zach?
We are on, I believe last time I checked was 25, and now we are on still 25. Let's try and get it over to 30 at the minute, and then we'll start getting it rolling from there.
Come on.
Come on, everyone.
There's got to be 5 people who need to hit like, so we can go through some lineups whilst you're here.
Wilton says, is there a team better than the template? Let's take a minute and talk about the template. Do we have our top slides? Oh, we'll go into our picks in just a minute. I don't think we still have our top lineups up.
The issue with the other templates, I think, is I remember thinking of 2 different ones where it was either, like you were speaking about, Adam, where you have McLaren and Red Bull instead of McLaren and Mercedes with Piastri, or you had Norris, McLaren, Mercedes, and then dropped an Ocon to a Bortoletto. It's one of those things when Piastri looks so good at the minute. He looks better than Norris, so you'd have him over him, so that's not an issue. And then you'd be like, oh, okay, well, I don't need Bortoletto in my team. And then, like we said with Red Bull earlier on, they just haven't showed much, enough for me to be like, yeah, I want to stick him in my team instead.
Yeah.
I can take.
I guess the only other variations would be if you had, instead of Piastri, a Mercedes driver. But how confident are we that a Mercedes driver would beat Piastri? For me, not too much.
No, I think we need something to happen for that to happen, as in to happen to Piastri.
So because we don't have a slide already with what the proposed template looks like, my team just locked and just launched. So I'll get this out of the way for those of you that want to hear about it in the early part of the show. The team we're talking about here is Piastri, McLaren, and Mercedes, with the 4 most likely drivers per the budget simulator tool from F1 Fantasy Tools we showed a moment ago. So this team could gain up to 2.5 million in value, but also is one of the top scoring options of the week because of that McLaren, Mercedes, Piastri base. And to do this, because I started with Lando to start the week, I'm taking a minus 20, something I've never done in my years of playing the game to make it happen. But even with that minus 20, it's still one of the top scoring options for me this week.
Yeah, I feel this is going to be a very familiar lineup as we go through them, to be honest. To be honest, I mean, mine's the same. So we touch on mine at the same time while it's here. Mine was slightly different because I was running Oscar already. So mine was only a minus 10 to get to this. And my other option, which I think I saw someone do the same in there, which is I could have stayed with Haas and not brought in them and run Russell as the second top driver. So that was the other option I had, and not taking any penalty points and still get a big budget gain. So I went with Mercedes to go a bit safer. But the other option that I could have had to not take the minus was to actually run that. And it was only, to be honest, staying about 8 or 9 points off. So it wasn't a lot of difference. Hence why I went with it. So I went for the Mercedes one and went for a bit of safety in numbers by having both drivers rather than pinning everything on George on that front and potentially losing a slight bit of cost cap, but hoping that Mercedes as a constructor do better.
I know Terry's already up a few points on Zach and I in the league this year. And he knows if I lock in the same team, they're taking a minus 20, I'm taking a minus 10. That
I'm going to do this all season. I'm just going to lock in the same team as Adam so I can beat him. I'm not worried about winning. Just literally every week, you're just going to see the same.
Oh, I'll never hear the end of it.
It is one of those things, isn't it, where I have seen a few people, I mean, even in the chat as well, I've seen someone talk about potentially a triple McLaren team. I'm assuming with a Haas as well. It's just one of those things in F1 Fantasy. Now, of course, it won't be exactly the same as it was in Japan, but the constructors, the big constructors, normally score so much more points than a second A-tier driver. So to put it into perspective, let's say you had Racing Bulls, I'm being nice to you, and you had 14 points in Japan. The difference between them and Mercedes is 42 points.
Yeah.
The difference between Russell, who got 18 points last weekend out, compared to, let's say, a Doohan, is 12 points. And that's why I feel like it's always better to upgrade the constructor over a second A-tier driver until you can have 2 A-tier constructors and 2 A-tier drivers.
Interesting question there from Melissa. How do you grow your cost cap? This is always a big thing. I struggle with this, to be honest. This is probably the first year I've taken a dive into cost cap building early on. Normally, I just go for the best team and I just put it out there and go for points all the time. So it's been a very different way of playing it this year around with the pricing and trying to get my head around that. So I'm with Melissa on this one. So Adam, over to you while I drink coffee.
I'm ready, Terry and Melissa. So price changes are based on the scores of the last 3 races. So entering this week, we can take the scores from China and Japan and predict which drivers and constructors are most likely to gain value, assuming an average race this week. And F1 Fantasy Tools' budget builder gives you the odds based on the simulated points they should get this week, the odds of them going up the maximum or going down the most price per week and everything in between. And so we can just cruise over here, find the highest odds in this last green column, and those are the most likely drivers and constructors to go up in price this week. And so if you have a balance of growing your cost cap, which allows you to afford better drivers later in the season, and going for points, which keeps your rank nice and high, striking that balance will be the key to having the best result this year.
There you go.
I am straying a little bit off topic here, but I did just refresh my screen. And thank
Oh,
you all so much. We're up to 54 likes already.
oh, does that mean we should get some teams on
What?
the go? Let's get some
Let's fire it
lineups
up.
out. Thank you.
I was going to say, for anyone who would just looked at me and looked at my other screen, all of a sudden I just had like a shocked face.
The people have spoken. It's time for some lineups. All right, so our friend Woo True Racing is back, and you can see it's just all flavors of these same lineups. And I bet you this is going to be the most common question this week. It's the template team that I just showed a moment ago that we all have. There's it looks like a beefed up version where you have Lando and Bortoletto, and then there's hanging back and going with Triple Haas and Antonelli potentially for more cost cap growth.
See, this is very similar to what I had, which is obviously like I said, I had it was saying Russell for me instead of Kimmy on my one. And it's a real fine line between a budget and a points one, because there's not a lot in it, if I remember rightly from the Sims. There's not a huge amount between that template team of team 1 and that team 3 one, if I remember rightly. But I think that team 3 one's got the potential to give you slightly more budget, if I remember rightly.
Yeah, the good news about Haas being a B tier constructor is that they can get 0.3 million more than Mercedes, assuming an average week. Both 99% likely to go up in price, so those things are obvious. But also, if a Haas driver DNFs, mechanical issue or a turn 1 incident, it's going to hit you in 2 places. So that made me very nervous doing this in Japan last week. I kind of like, if you have the budget to do this middle team, I like it as a differential because so many of us are going on to Piastri. So it's just a matter of, do you want to swim with all of the fish going in the same direction this week and go with this first team? Or do you want to try something a little different where you have a lot of cost cap growth potential? But if Lando gets the win, he's more likely to get driver of the day. Then there's some extra points in there for you.
Yeah, no, I think realistically, I think the McLaren team orders are in place. I think it's based off whoever qualifies highest, if I'm honest, from what I'm seeing from the season. So I think whoever's in the leagues, first corner, opening lap, that sort of thing, that seems to be the way McLaren are playing their team orders currently. So if by any chance Lando pulls out a much better lap, I think he's been better at qualifying than what Oscar has this year. So there's no reason why. Like I said, I mean, Lando is 0.6 off in free practice 3. He's not going to be that can qualifying. So if he happens to put it on pole instead of Oscar, then there's every ounce to say that McLaren might well favour Lando in the race if he's the lead driver going into it with how they are. So that second one could also give you something a little different.
Zach, let me ask you, Duarte in the chat wants to know, he's got a very similar team to this one. I think there's Doohan instead of one of the Haas drivers, Russell instead of Kimi, but McLaren Haas. Do you recommend changing anything when you have 2 powerful drivers at the top of your team, but then the weaker constructor in Haas?
Yeah, it's one of those things. A team like that is hard because the difference is it because if you switch from that team to a more template Piastri McLaren Mercedes team, it'd probably be a -20. And the issue is if you already have Piastri and Russell already in there, I think the points gap becomes a little bit less, and all of a sudden that -20 becomes a bit more serious. So I would say if you have the transfers, go over to the Piastri McLaren Mercedes. But if you don't, you could easily just stick it out with this weekend doing one of having Piastri and Russell and Haas and then moving over. So I think you're in a good enough position right now where you won't lose too much points still having that, because it is still a good team. It's just most likely Haas will let you down on the constructor side of things.
Fair point. Jumped over Tony. All right, so Tony's Japan team looked very similar to ours. We've got 2 transfers, or it's basically the same decisions that we had, Zach. So certainly, you know where we're leaning. It's the decision we made. It's this last team, -20. But I think this team, like Tony asked in the question, and like Zach said a moment ago, this team can cover the -20 no problem just in the constructor.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm definitely very much happy with that team. It would have been different if Norris was showing something else, especially for me and Adam. I mean, you can see it in the first and second team there. So you're in a similar situation to us, but with Norris not looking absolutely fantastic, it then becomes a thing where, well, if Piastri outscores Norris, you're losing points there, and then you're losing even more points on Haas instead of Mercedes. And I think it's just too much of a risk, considering we know no matter, well, I say no matter what happens, something could happen, but less risk involved if you have Piastri, McLaren, Mercedes for anything to go wrong.
Winton asks in the chat, have you shared and locked your teams? So I've locked in this exact team with this exact penalty. Terry's locked in this exact team with a -10. Zach, have you locked in yet?
I will post mine right now. And it is live.
So is there some drama here? Hold on, I'm gonna go over to it. Let's see.
No, it's just some anticipation.
If you make me go all the way over here for the same team.
Oh, what a surprise.
What a shocker.
Who would have
So we've
guessed?
all locked in the same team, Winton.
Yeah, it was just too much of a risk not having it. Literally I explained my reasoning in the last teams, because I had the exact same issue as Tony had here. And if Norris showed something better, I would have stuck it out one more weekend, but he didn't show me enough. So I think if I don't take this -20, it really could damage my season.
You know, I just realized now, looking back at Tony's team, instead of and he also corrected in the chat, instead of Bortoleto, I have Ocon, and then Tony says in the chat, instead of Piastri, he actually meant Lando, so it'd be Bortoleto, Lando instead of Piastri, Ocon as we have it.
Oh,
does that change
makes things a little I think it's, for me, definitely team one don't use, because Stroll, Hulkenberg, they're going to be going down in price straight away. That's not the issue. It then comes down to, Tony, if you put in the chat, what is your team value? Because I would say if you have less than around 103 million, 103-ish million in team value, then I would say stick with the maximum budget building. But if you can, actually, you would have over that. So I would say, team 3 is still the one I would go for. 106.3, 100% go for still team 3 for me.
Oh, good for you, Tony.
Yeah, that's a really good team value.
That's a great bit of budget building that Tony's done there. So is Alonso a terrible asset? I just saw that one in the chat. At the moment, yes.
Poor Fernando. When you look, he still has the DNF from China in his last 3 race average, so he's more likely than not going down in value this week. I think if Aston Martin take the corner in the next few weeks, you get those DNFs off your average, Alonso could surprise us and take the place of what Stroll was a few weeks ago. One good race, he's a candidate to gain value for multiple weeks. But for this week, I got to keep him out. Our producer Logan's just let us know we're up to 75 likes, which is my cue to get back into these lineups here.
Oh,
so the one on the right, I imagine that means Russell or Kimi with triple Haas.
Yes, that looks similar to the one I had. So I'd say that's, can't decide whether to go for Russell or Kimi as a difference on there, or run that one which we're all running. To put it bluntly. I mean, it's a tough one, because you've also got to try and probably find a way out of that triple Haas as well, haven't you? After this weekend. So for me, yes, you'll get slightly more budget if you run that one on the right, potentially, depending on which Mercedes driver you picked as well. Because there's also, you look at it, you go, if one of those Mercedes drivers score well, you're going to pick up a differential points on that one, but you are banking then on just one Mercedes driver rather than two. So it is a risky one of picking the right one for slightly more budget. So that's why it kind of put me off running that one, because no, my luck, the wrong Mercedes driver come through and I'll be sat here going, I really should have just taken -10 and banked both of them. So I think that's for me the big one. And then, like I say, you've got to make a move away from that triple Haas at some point, which could cost you longer down the road to get away from that with a couple of transfers to get out of that. So if you can get out of it now, actually, you're not going to be in a rush to get out of that McLaren, Oscar, Mercedes lineup very quickly, are you really? Reality says at the moment.
Yeah, Terry, you know how you're talking about as well, that you don't know which asset you would choose on the Mercedes and you probably picked the wrong one.
Yeah,
This on the poll now, it's gone a little bit further into Russell, but so far, Russell's 65%, Antonelli's 35. People are
that's what I
thinking.
mean.
Yeah.
That's what I mean. I mean, the Sims will say Russell lean towards, but Kimi has been performing well, and this is going to be a trap. Bear in mind that Kimi has history. He's driven it. He's known it. He's done preseason testing here. It's one of the first tracks we've been to where actually Kimi will know what the track is like to drive. He will know the layouts. He will know actually what it takes to go around here. You know, being the rookie he is, this isn't as much of a rookie track for him, is it? So actually, this is probably Kimi's best chance to lay a marker in terms of going up against George without that disadvantage of learning the track at the same time. So actually, that's the other thing that kind of gets me thinking. You know, it's Bahrain's used in the Sims quite a lot. So I don't know if you know, but Bahrain's actually quite a popular choice in Team Sims to do testing with both drivers coming up and also just testing parts and winter times because it's a test track. So they do drive this track a hell of a lot. So it is a track that they're familiar with. That's why we had so many rookies come in. So the teams know this track like the back of their hand. Yes, it's slightly different temperature, it's slightly different in terms of what we've got, but the temperature we're seeing now isn't unusual. The testing was the unusual temperature that we had. So actually, this is the norm for Bahrain, really, in terms of the heat and stuff. It was that cold preseason testing that was a tough one in terms of how we get the data from that one. So they know what they're doing around here. So actually, Kimi, George, flip a coin. I want to see Kimi. I want to see a Kimi storm at the grid.
Terry, let me ask you. You started the weekend wondering if Mercedes' performance in warm weather would be optimistic or not. They've had the benefit of a few cooler races to start the year. Have they shown you enough in free practice to clear some of that concern, or is there still something that worries you about them?
There's a niggle. I mean, obviously, we had that problem with Kimi's one. I made a joke about it. Literally, it happened straight away. So there's always a niggle for me, but we are qualifying in cool temperatures. The race is cooler than what we're seeing from the free practice session. So I, it's always going to be a niggle, but I think that hopefully they got enough in there to sort of put themselves in a good position and hopefully sort it out and not be worried about it. It's always, like I say, until we see it in hot weathers, it's always going to be at the back of my mind because for some reason that Mercedes engine, and bear in mind, we've changed a lot of stuff. The one thing we haven't changed is the engines. It's one thing that is the same all the way through. So they've not introduced no cooling for it in terms of extras. They've not introduced no updates to the engine because you can't because we're in engine freeze. So those issues from last year could potentially still be there this year. But then there's also the unknown. I think, like Zach said at the beginning of the show about Ferrari. What is Ferrari's true pace? You know, is that floor on? Is that floor off? Is that floor performing? What's it doing? They could be a real curveball into everything come qualifying later on.
Oh my goodness. So we'll see what happens in these next few sessions here. I mean, we're going off of as much data as we have at this point, and we haven't gotten over to the practice and the race and quali sims based off of the free practice time. So we can get into that a bit later too. But with some not very representative sessions to start the weekend, I think it's less valuable than it usually is for us. Michael Liu, you said in the chat your notes aren't included, and then you gave us some details about Team A and Team B. Let us know what your FanAmp username is, and I can look out for that when we go over your teams.
I've
So,
just
so we're
seen
saying
an
Team A then.
interesting chat. I've seen an interesting chat from William. It's asking what would the play be with a budget of 107.6 million? And this, I think, comes back to what we were talking about with how much budget can you leave, like, just not being used, because it sounds like a lot of a difference between the Piastri, McLaren, Mercedes teams, but there's no one really else you could go to right now who looks better, especially with the cheap drivers, the B tier drivers. All of the ones that we have right now, quite luckily for us, all the cheaper drivers who are going to go up 0.6 million. So you don't really need to change anything there. The only thing you could really change is the likes of, could you put in a Ferrari instead of Mercedes with 107.6 million? But then again, like we mentioned, where they will be, who knows? So it's one of those things where, yeah, you could generally just leave a lot of budget on the table and just go for Piastri, McLaren, Mercedes again.
And I think you're quite close to that triple McLaren build with decent drivers and a decent second constructor soon too. That's a good problem to have. Michael came back and said that he's actually the team on the screen here. So this left side is a -20 or wild card. The right side is a -10. So Zach, is your perspective, let's say wild card or an extra 10-point bonus, does that sway you versus the team on the right? We don't know which Mercedes driver will be best this week. We don't know how much longer running triple Haas will work before it blows up on our face. Does that extra 10 points move the needle for you?
I think I'd still go Piastri, McLaren, Mercedes, and I think I think I've said this before as well. I think if you're like me and Adam who have had to take a -20, it's not a terrible time to use a wild card for it. So I think Team One for me is still the way to go. And yeah, I would say also just wild card it.
That sounds good. You'll score more than us, that we're all taking a penalty.
Yeah.
We've got 8 more lineups to go through, so let's muscle through some more. LH Ferrari, love the team name. Going with VCAR McLaren, Piastri, and Kimi, moving to a George team. So I imagine because of budget constraints, you couldn't get to a McLaren driver in your 2X spot, but you want to take advantage of the constructors.
Isn't VCOB due to go up there as well?
They are, but it'd be at the expense of points, basically. So you could keep a team like this, or bring Kimmy down into a do-in or an Ocon, roll some money over, and then you'd have 4 or 5 assets getting that value, so you can get into a McLaren driver over here in the future. I think this is around the point, like what Zach was saying earlier. This team looks like it's around 103 million, maybe a little bit less, and could benefit from one more week of cost cap growth.
Yeah, there goes Rick one. Yeah, you couldn't get McLaren.
I'm looking at that team as well, especially the first team. And because the second team has Bortoletto in it, yeah, like you mentioned with the budget's not fantastic on Team 2, which would, definitely 100% help more having Racing Bulls just for one more weekend to just get a bit more. I've also seen in the chat, Terry, this might be a good message for you. Please, guys, help me out. I accidentally locked in my team with a -20. Can I use my wild card to get rid of it?
Wow, we've
Terry move I've ever seen.
This happens at least once a season, and I'm hoping that I've done mine already. I got away with it. Can you still use a wild card? I believe you can, can't you? You can until
once you lock in your team, you can undo any negative transfer penalties you've taken with wild card or limitless. So anything that grants unlimited transfers will reverse that penalty out. It'll replace your penalty with the infinity symbol for transfers.
Yeah. So it depends on what you've locked in and what you haven't. Sometimes you can kind of go with it, like I did. When I was messing with mine, it wasn't the worst when I did, so I kind of went with it. So yeah, I would say depending on your team, -20 isn't overly bad. Depending on what you locked in is what I would say. But if you've locked something in that's a bit of a disaster and you still got a wild card, absolutely, unlock it and do it that way.
Wonderful. And it looks like this team is Rick in the chat, and he confirmed that he can't quite get into one of the McLaren drivers here. So Rick, we recommend another week of budget building through a team like the one you have on the left. All right, Joe has -10 on the left, or a smaller cost cap gain, it looks like, on the right. But maybe a few more points with Williams.
I would go to one on the left.
I think I'd agree as well. I'm a little bit confused with the -25.
I think what they're saying, what Joe's saying here, is that this team will get you an extra 0.3 million through Williams, but it's going to score 25 fewer points. So what would you?
I see.
The 25 points of the 0.3.
I'd say that's probably not worth the 0.3, to be honest. With a lot of risk in it. It's 0.3, and that's providing everything comes up on that one. So I'd say for the -10, play it a bit safe.
Zach made a good point off air before we came on too about this team. So many of us are getting into it that if something bad happens, we're all going down together. So to me, this feels like a tough week to go really far off the beaten path. I would just stay right in the lane this week. Go with a team similar to this, unless you're cost cap building. Stick with a McLaren, Haas, VCarb, Williams, second constructor, and then we can start spanning out as we get into Jeddah and then the next sprint in Miami.
Ooh.
Hold up, we got some more. Now that I got a refresh. El Potato Love that name. All right, Potatoes got McLaren and Williams. Looking at our new meta in the middle, a -10 for McLaren V carb with George Russell. I would take this back to Terry's point earlier. Is the problem with picking a singular Mercedes driver is that you're trying to guess the right one, and maybe you haven't. And by having the constructor, you're just buffered in case one is better than the other that you haven't picked.
Yeah.
All right, Havoc Gamer. I only see one here, so I think it's just a critique. It's exactly what we all have, so we love it.
Terrible team.
We're just a few more likes from 100. It would be our most foreign episode on a live stream this season. So if you haven't liked yet, please hit it. It would mean a lot to us. John Mar wants to know, take a -20 for the team you see here. I did.
I'll leave this to you two, yeah?
I did, so it's totally fine.
Yep, I mean, it'd be, again, a bit of a surprise if I wasn't fully on board with this team. So 100%. So yeah, I would take it. It's looking very good.
And Bazadar in the chat has the exact same scenario. Take a -20 with this team or stay with the exact same team we had last week. So Zach and I had the situation you have, Bazadar, and chose this lineup with the -20 over sticking with the one that you have. And at 106.3 million, no need to go crazy with cost cap.
Also, a couple of interesting ones. Tommy to Fish says, if I keep Piastri, Triple Haas, and swap Nico for Hadja, I can have 3 transfers next week. Would there be any importance for 3 transfers?
So I was dabbling with this a bit because basically what we're saying is we're taking a -20 now instead of a -10. We could roll a transfer into next week, but that difference between Mercedes and Haas is more than the -10 that I'd be saving myself by letting that third transfer roll into next week.
Yeah.
So yeah. How many points did you say earlier? It's a matter of like 30 to 40 points between Mercedes and Haas, right?
Yeah, if we're going just off Japan, Mercedes scored 56 points, and it would be Racing Bulls or Haas realistically. All right, let's be generous and say Williams, 19 points. That is a 37-point difference, which for me is enough to make the risk. And that's with Williams. And a lot of people would probably have Haas or Racing Bulls, which is even more.
Yeah.
J-Give wants to put previous me up against current me because at the beginning of the week, I was unsure about the -20 for moving off of Triple Haas into McLaren and Mercedes. What's changed? I think 2 things. One is that we were really uncertain about Mercedes in the warm weather. And I think they've done enough in the free practice sessions between the sims, the Vegas lines. I think most people are confident that Mercedes can put 2 drivers in the top 6 or 7 or so, which means they're good enough to be a second constructor. And then also, no other team has really stuck out that even with the -20, it's still 20 or 30 points better than anything else I could do with my budget. So I think I am starting to advocate for that -20. I had never done it before, so I was nervous about it Monday, Tuesday when our video came out, but now I'm going bold. So if you want to go with the -20 with me, I've made a shift.
I know someone mentioned earlier in the week as well when I started talking about the -20, and they were like, I never thought I'd see the day where Zach would be talking about taking a -20. It's crazy.
All right, here's our friend Brian BZ showing a team with Lando and Bortoletto and Kimmy. I think he loaded a few here. Oh, maybe not. Brian, let us know in the chat if I've messed up the slides here. If there are more teams that you wanted us to consider.
So that Brian's just going all in. It's one or the other, isn't it? You know.
He always has the Eau Rouge and 130 R. I don't know which team this is or if he's got some other options, but of course, this week we like Piastri because he's toe to toe with Lando, something like 6.8 million cheaper, and then that allows you to get into a better constructor down here. But
ooh, how many lineups have we got? Because Winton has got a nice little segue onto the picks there, Adam, where they've said what are the FanAmp merch giveaways this week that
let's do it.
That's a lovely prompt.
So the way you can win some wonderful merch from our sponsor, Fifth Gear Garms, is to head over to the FanAmp app, go to the races tab, and then select your picks for this week. You could see Terry, Zach, and myself are here. Very McLaren heavy podium, or at least top 3 for qualifying. We all think a different driver is going to finish P11, and I'm the only one with faith in Jack doing to make it out of Q1. So if you fill out your picks each week, we randomly select one lucky winner to win a prize from Fifth Gear Garms. So this is how you do it. And I'll have you know, Terry, because you weren't on our show at the beginning of the week, I won for Japan out of the 3 of us. So I'm good at something.
Well, what can I say? I should pay more attention to this one. I just pick. In fact, I get Jensen to pick mine.
I like it. I like it. That is a worthy adversary for me.
It's my new style. Don't tell Greg. He's on here this week, so we'll be fine. He won't catch up at the show.
Fantastic.
We need 2 likes to apparently get 100. There must be 2 people
goodness.
who haven't.
I'm just double checking as well.
Don't make me log in and like it, because that would just be wrong.
It's done.
It's done.
It's hit 100.
Wonderful. I've got the FanAmp app open here, guys. I want to go through Brian's teams because he did send a few in. So he's at 104.7 right now. So right on the fringe of a few different lineup options. Lando, McLaren, Haas. That's probably the same team that we had last week. Take a -20 for the team that we got into. Let's see. Just move into Piastri and Williams, and that way you're not taking the penalty, but you're still saddled with Stroll and Hulkenberg.
I'd say not that one.
Yeah, same.
Williams, Stroll, Hulkenberg probably isn't the best option, I don't think.
And then one of his teams rolled a 3rd transfer from Japan, so he can get into the super team a lot easier than we can. Had Piastri with 3 transfers, so we can get into the super team with no penalty.
Ooh. I would say that's a definite news on that one. Winter then news from pit lanes. There's nothing out of the ordinary going on. There doesn't seem any problems. There's nothing which anyone's concerned about.
We know Hulkenberg's alive and well.
I believe so. I will just do a double check, but from what I can see, we're not hearing any problems with anybody. So,
all right, let's fly through a couple more lineups here. I think it's going to start getting easier here.
While you do that, I'll have a quick check and make sure we're not missing anything here.
There's a team that can get into triple McLaren with Aston Martin.
Oh, Aston Martin.
But triple McLaren.
The only issue with Aston Martin is they need 13 points to go up 0.6 million. And even though it doesn't seem like a lot for a constructor, they haven't had it. They didn't get it in China or Japan, which could be a bit of an issue if we're talking about increasing budget. But if you can afford triple McLaren, maybe that's why
maybe budget's not a problem for you anyway.
Yeah. But again, it's one of those things, for me, just it'll always be better to have the better constructor than an extra A-tier driver.
And just to evolve on that, I would say stay with the rest of us on this team, get the cost cap growth, and then you'll be much closer to this plus something a little bit better because you are head and shoulders ahead of everybody else because I can't afford this.
Yeah, nothing exciting going on in the pit lane. Everyone's not reporting any problems, so we'll be going as usual. Mercedes or Red Bull as 2 constructors with Piastri. I would go for Mercedes because Yuki's not inspiring me with confidence, unfortunately, at the moment. I'm not seeing any turnaround that the swap of Yuki and Liam is bringing Red Bull into play as a second constructor. That's pure and simple on that one, to be honest. I think Max will score well, but I still think the two Mercedes will score a lot more.
I think Russell's got a slightly higher upside over Verstappen this week. I haven't seen a ton of fastest pit stop magic from Red Bull to make up for that pace gap that the second driver has to a team like Mercedes. So I would go with them too.
Yeah, that's kind of the issue as well with the differential play this weekend, because we've got another chat from DAW. Is there any differential for 105.8 budget? And realistically, the only differential would be Red Bull at that budget. And it's not worth the risk not having Mercedes. Yeah.
Melissa says that she needs F1 fantasy teams for dummies. We have something like this on fanamp.com/fantasy. All of the beginner guides, the chip guides, budget building guides to start warming you up to this. But by all means, our DMs are open. Feel free to come to these shows and reply to our YouTube videos. We're very responsive. So we'll get you up there in no time, Melissa.
Yeah, we've also got the preview show as well, Melissa. So there is 2 to keep an eye on. So if you do need to catch up, the preview show gives you a good early steer. And then obviously the deadline one will give you that final bit. But if you watch the preview show, it does give you a good idea to set your team up and get you thinking, to be honest. And also might give you some time to actually, sort of submit a lineup and get some things on there. So, I don't know, Melissa, everyone's doing the chat's just doing the plugs there, aren't we? So how do you get your teams up on the screen? Wow, we just sit back and just read the chat. We don't need to do a show anymore. I mean,
it's true. It's true. The chat's doing the heavy lifting for me. If you download the FanAmp app, we have our own base. You go to the fantasy formula, and then there is a chat within that called lineups. You just take a picture of your team, drop it in the the team's chat, and our producer will put it onto the slides for us now. But with these last few minutes coming up, if you have any questions, just throw it in the chat because we're almost at the lightning round. We've got Greg here on the screen. Not our producer, Greg. I think it's a different Greg. This is way too good of a team to be producer, Greg. Piastri, Antonelli, McLaren, and V-Carb. I think that the advice we'd be giving in this case, you don't know which Mercedes driver will be the best this week, so I would get out of Antonelli, try to upgrade that V-Carb into Mercedes if you can, even if that means downgrading a Haas driver to afford it.
Yeah, I think what you lose budget-wise, you're gaining points-wise, so I don't think it's that much of a big difference by swapping over. I don't think you're going to gain massively by running one of the Mercedes ones.
Okay, good.
Oh, question, George. Am I thinking that Max can pull out a super magic bolt? No. I'm not. No. It is Max. Don't get me wrong. He's driving absolutely awesome. It's not a slur on Red Bull, and I've had this quite a few sort of this season. I genuinely believe that Max is driving that Red Bull more than what many drivers could drive it. He is the best driver on the grid. There's no doubt about it. So we saw that in Japan, and I think only Max Verstappen could do what he did in that Red Bull. Genuinely think so. But I think around here, the gap is too big from what I'm seeing. Unless there's a mistake, a lap deletion, a flag maybe, that's the only way I can see Max getting pole around here. I've not seen enough from it. We normally see Red Bull turn up, like Adam said earlier, with free practice 3, with changes they've made, feeling a lot more settled. Max kind of creeping at the table. We haven't seen that today at all, really. We've not seen anything that makes you think that they've unlocked anything special within the Red Bull. So that's the other thing. Max normally, you can tell from his radio messages, can't you, how happy he's feeling. He's not one to hold back, is he? So yeah, from that point of view, I think from a pole position, I don't think so. I think the McLaren's just got ahead. Sorry, George. I did used to be a believer, but I'm also a realist as well.
Winston, thank you for the kind words in the chat here. Yeah, we try our very best to stay organized, to be attentive to all of you, and we just have the best community in this game. We're so proud to represent you all. So
we do, and likewise, it's nothing without the people joining the chat and actually joining the show, is it? So ultimately, everyone else makes it as well. So from that point of view, so it's a genuine thank you to everyone who drops a lineup in or comes in chats and likes and comments and all those things, because ultimately we do this, but we also need, everyone to actually come and support it, which everyone does amazingly well. So yeah, it's really good.
We've got 8 minutes left to set your team. So if you haven't already, make sure you hit that submit button. Don't save it to the last minute or two, because if there's any app gremlins, who knows what will happen to you. Winton also wants to know, do we have any crazy fun predictions for this race?
Oh.
Pierre Gasly P11. I don't know about crazy. I mean, will we see? I suppose for me, that midfield is where the crazy is going to happen, isn't it? I feel that midfield is really close. I genuinely think that Williams could be a surprise here. It's a track they tend to do well at normally, sort of early season doors. Carlos looks a bit more comfortable on that one. So could Carlos beating Alex? Is that a crazy idea? A few weeks ago, you wouldn't have thought that, would you? But actually, now we're in the world of, Alex has performed really well since Carlos has come. I know Carlos is adapting to the team, but actually, could we see this be the turnaround for Carlos this weekend in terms of the Williams drivers? There you go. There's a crazy prediction. Carlos to qualify better than Alex.
I would have thought Carlos would have been a few tenths faster after having the most expensive bathroom trip in recorded history last year, but maybe this is the week he does it. I'll say for a crazy prediction, it'll be a Racing Bulls driver to get its driver of the day. Zach, what's your crazy prediction?
Well, I don't. You know what? I'm gonna go with something fun, crazy. Lance Stroll back in form, gets 10th or above.
10th or above.
10th. Wow.
Oh my goodness. We will bring
All aboard it
poutine to
again.
the next live show if that
Let's
happens.
clip that one. Absolutely, you know.
Fantastic.
Tommy to Fish wants to know Bortoletto or Durham. One
Do
of them is due a price rise, but more, isn't it?
It's doing. Yeah, let's do
It
the
is doing,
price
yeah.
rise. We can come over here and you can see the points are basically negligible between the two of them. But in the
That was it.
case of doing his previous history, that 11 points in China makes him slightly just more likely to gain some value. Might not be the maximum, but something. Whereas
Yeah,
Bortoletto is pretty much a wash this week.
Yeah, Bortoletto needs 12 or more points to get 0.6 million, which in that Sauber, I don't see happening. It could be an issue. I mean, even if he's really extremely unlucky, he could get less than 3 points and then he can't go down, but less than 3 points isn't a great asset to have.
Hugo wants to know in the chat. Same ham magic. I heard the saddest quote from Lewis on this because they interviewed him and they basically said,
yeah.
"What
He
do you
said
say to
no.
those fans that are expecting some Hamilton magic this week?" He said, "Don't." Not maybe, we'll see. He just said don't. So that's
The
sad.
the only magic, unfortunately, Lewis is having this weekend is he keeps pressing the magic button on the brakes, which, as we all know from Baku, isn't the best thing from years ago. So yeah, whatever setup is on the Ferrari steering wheel is causing Lewis some magic problems in terms of the brakes at the moment. So let's hope he doesn't do that on a flying lap, to be honest, because that would be a disaster. Melissa said yes, FanAmp is the app mentioned. Yep. So yeah, just search for FanAmp and download that one.
Harry, I don't want to go the full hour without talking about some of those Ferrari upgrades though, because we entered the week with so much hype about all the things they've changed. Is there like an abridged version of this you could tell us about what's changed, and do you think it'll stick on the car for this weekend?
It's a whole new floor. So the whole update is around the floor. So floor fences, floor body, diffuser. So it's all around the floor. So the best way to describe it is a brand new floor. Now, this is because they can't run it as low as they want to. So same problem we have from Mercedes over the past couple of years. You have to take the ride height higher. As soon as you do that, you lose all your downforce, lose all your performance. That's what Ferrari's problem's been. So this new floor is to combat that. They've got some clever stuff on it, on how to do it. It seems to have made a difference in terms of hopefully putting them in the window. So all this is doing them is to enable them to actually run it at the height they want to get performance. So that's what this is about. There's another update due Imola, I believe. A lot of teams are bringing updates for Imola, so keep your eye out for that one. Imola seems to be very much the big update sort of date we're getting for all the teams for this season. So the diffuser, all of it's had to be changed because as soon as you change one part on the floor, you ultimately have to change everything. The only part we've not seen is the floor body, which has got the venturi tunnels underneath. So we're not quite sure what's going on with that because we haven't had it craned up in the air. Much to probably the team's disappointment because they will love that. But from Ferrari, what they've done is they started off with FP1, which had the reserve driver in. So he had the old floor, Lewis had the new floor. And then from then onwards, they both had the new floor once Charles come back in the car. So FP1 was, like I said, there was a comparison on it. And then FP2 onwards, they've both been running with the new floor to try and do it. They're happy with the data they got. It's telling them that that's what the wind tunnel correlation is. So it's doing what they want them to do. But yeah, from that point of view, for me, I don't think it's enough to take them up to sort of McLaren territory. I think it's more allowing them to put the car in the window they want to remain competitive, like we saw sort of early doors before obviously the disqualifications hit. So that's the thing for them. But yeah, from the tech updates, they were the only real ones who brought any updates. Everyone else was like very minimal, cooling stuff like that. Was an exciting week for tech updates. So yeah.
And like you said, Terry, I'm used to seeing all of the big updates at Imola, so I think we still have a lot of shaking up to do at the top of the
Yeah.
grid in the coming weeks. We'll see if Ferrari keep with the floor and if it gets them back into their winning ways this weekend. But if not, there's still plenty of time to make up for it.
Yeah, and they can obviously revert back as well. We've seen a couple of teams do that. Aston Martin and done that a couple of times. So they will know from the data they get from here. Like we said, it's a test track. They know all of the details, so they'll be able to get it on there and sort of see if it's doing what it needs to do, and then make a call on it.
All right, we are in the final minute. If you have any last second questions, be sure to let us know. But hopefully by now you're all locking your teams. Thank you all so much for watching. We had a blast in this last hour, and we'll all be back at it again next Saturday ahead of the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. Let's do it all again. Zach and Terry, any final thoughts for this week?
No, have fun. Can't wait. Should be good.
Yeah, just make sure that if anything F1 Fantasy happens that does affect your team, don't let it put too much of a downer on you, because I know it can sometimes.
Yeah, remember it's for fun.
Thank you all so much for watching, and we'll see you next week.